Well, good evening to everyone. I'm really glad you're here. I think this is going to be a very special evening for us. And I love the format, something really we discovered as a result of COVID, to being able to do live interviews with gospel preachers and others, that the kind of things that I think will really encourage us. And thankful for the guys in the AV room. I'm amazed at now what they're able to do and to put together. And they've worked very hard to make this what we wanted it to be tonight. Let's begin with a prayer. Our Holy Father, we're so thankful for the blessing of the Lord today, for what it means to us as your children, for the encouragement we receive, for the instruction we receive. And we pray that what we do today honors you. We're thankful that tonight we can share this time with Brother Amador. We look forward to it. We're thankful for the good and faithful servant that he has been of yours for decades. And pray we'll listen attentively, that we'll learn things tonight and be encouraged. In Jesus' name, amen. I first met Brother Amador probably about 40 years ago. I was just a baby, but he's a little older than me. I won't say much. He's old. I'm not quite there. But he is someone I haven't been close to, but who I've known of and known of his work all through the years, and how much he is loved and appreciated for what he has done. He'll tell us more about himself, but I do urge you to listen attentively to the things that he has to say. And you'll learn a lot tonight, not only about work in Central and South America, but in other places also. Brother Reuben, we're glad to have you with us tonight. Glad you could be with us.
Well, I appreciate very much the opportunity to be a part of the assembly, and also to share some of the information that I've been able to gain, through the years. The experience in the preaching of the gospel among the Spanish-speaking people, not only in our country, but in so many other places in South America, Central America, and Mexico. And of course, we'll have more to say about that in a few minutes.
Well, kind of give us a little of your background about where you're from and about what you've done through the years in your work.
Yes, first of all, let me tell you that I'm from South Texas. The little town that my wife and I were born in is called Sinton, Texas, Sinton, and it's only 30 miles north of Corpus Christi. Here, back when I was 6 years old, Wayne Patton and Fernando Coronado, two of the first preachers in this little community, started to work in Sinton. And my mother took us to the very first assembly of that beginning Church of Christ among the Hispanic people. There was an English-speaking congregation, and there still is, at Borton Street in Sinton. And a good number of men that you are familiar with have worked with the English-speaking congregation. But my mother was the first one to obey the gospel, then my sister, and then my father. And shortly after that, my father started preaching. And he was very helpful in the local work, but also in working with churches in South Texas, and also in beginning several churches in South Texas. And finally, he also moved up to Fort Worth area, McKinney area, up in that part of our state of Texas. And then he moved to Houston and worked with me here for several years. Most of the work among local churches have been done here in the Houston area. Back in 1967, my wife and I and our son, we moved from Port Arthur to work with the beginning of a Spanish-speaking congregation. And through the years, we were able to establish 4 different congregations here in the Houston area. All, churches that are doing the kind of work that any church is able to do. But I want to emphasize that I started preaching because we were encouraged as young men in a local congregation to prepare sermons that were either 2 or 3 minutes long. Of course, it felt like it was an hour long, like you know, with your own experience. But I became really a product of the work of a local congregation. The whole congregation encouraged teenagers to preach. And I started preaching regularly when I was 12 years old. And I held my first gospel meeting when I was 16 in Harlingen, Texas. So all of that to say is that I've been pretty busy for a long time. And right now I am working with the Fry Road Church of Christ here in Houston, and trying to do the best I can to serve as an elder with that congregation. We've been there 12 years working with them. So this is what we've been able to do here in the Houston area. And we have 3 children. Of course, Reuben is doing also an excellent job as an evangelist with one of the English-speaking congregations here in Houston. So I am a second-generation preacher, and I have a son that also is devoted to preaching the gospel.
Well, tell us a little bit about your work outside the U.S. and about the work in Central South America in those areas.
When I thought I was going to retire from the Spanish work, I became more active. During this particular time, I was holding, I was making all these trips into Central and South America and Mexico. And I saw that there was a need for someone to continually visit with them, to work with them. And we did that. And then there were some areas in these countries where no one was going. Very, very few preachers would want to venture into some of these difficult areas. You take, for example, Cuba. No one was going to Cuba to preach the gospel for years and years and years. No one wanted to go. Everybody was afraid to go. So I decided that I was going to try it, and I did. And Ecuador is another place where it was very difficult. Venezuela was another country. El Salvador, because of the revolution. Nicaragua. All of these places were hot places because of the revolution, because of the people that wanted to make changes. And then in Mexico you have the drug people, and all of these factors were keeping a lot of preachers from going into Mexico and into Central and South America. And these brethren were wanting people to go visit with them and teach them and help them out. And one of the greatest needs that I saw all during these years was the need of elders in local churches. Very, very few churches in the Spanish work have elders and deacons. And I must tell you that nearly all of them have preachers working with them full time. But as far as elders, it's very poor. I would say that in the last 6-7 years is when you have had a lot of other churches that are beginning to look into the possibilities of having elders. So my interest in helping these churches was to have them, organize, because they need elders. It's a must.
Well, I know when we were having a conversation earlier about this, you talked about how we need to recognize that the work in Spanish is really very much the same thing they were doing in the New Testament. Yes.
One of the things that we all are very, very familiar with is Mark chapter 16, verse 15. And go into all the world, and preach the gospel. Well, the apostles was charged with that responsibility. And in Acts chapter 2, you have a good chapter that describes the speaking in tongues and how they were able to communicate the great works of God. And this helps us to understand that right off at the very beginning, the apostles were doing exactly what the Lord charged them to do. Preach the gospel to all the world, to all the creatures, to everyone. Well, on the day of Pentecost, I mean, I have no idea how many languages were spoken. And that is impressive. From the very beginning that the gospel was preached, it was preached in several languages. Of course, Spanish and English were not there at that time. But my point is that sometimes we ignore, and not because we want to, but we're so involved in applying the speaking in tongues, which is biblical, which is right. But the point that is made in verse 11 is when they themselves say, we hear them speaking in our own tongues the wonderful works of God. And the implication here is great. It don't make any difference what language you preach, English or Spanish. The gospel is being preached. And that's the nature of the work in Spanish. Let me tell you, we have our own Bible. This is a Spanish Bible. And this is probably the equivalent to the King James. And this is the version that is used everywhere we go. Of course, now you have different ones available. But at the very beginning, when we started preaching, this was the Bible that we were using. Not only that, but we have our own song book. And this one, by the way, was started by a brother from Abilene Christian College. He was J.W. Treat. I met him when I was 8 years old. Brother Treat was a professor of Spanish at Abilene Christian College. And he was the one that took a tremendous interest in the gospel being preached in Spanish. So he started this song book, and it's been revised, I don't know how many times, but about 20 times, since the very beginning back in the 1930s. And this is something, of course, that we're real proud of. Nearly all of the assemblies among the Spanish-speaking churches are identical to the ones that you see there in Tampa, here in Houston, everywhere. The only difference is that we're singing, praying, teaching in Spanish. And once in a while, you'll run into a congregation that is bilingual. And someone will say the same thing that has been said in Spanish will be said in English and vice versa. So the assemblies are practically identical. If you were to attend any one of the Spanish-speaking churches here in the area, you would notice that the format is nearly identical.
Well, I think part of our conversations is maybe change my language about how I talk about this some. When we talk about the English work and we talk about the Spanish work, basically it's gospel work, just like in Acts.
Amen.
It's just,
yes.
You may be speaking a different language, and so it's all tied together. And we need to look at it that way, I think, that there isn't this other work over here. No, it's the same work in preaching the gospel. They're just speaking in a different language. And to have the blessing that there are those who can do that to extend the gospel work. I mentioned to you that 30% of the people in Tampa Bay are Hispanic. And it is a wide open field here in Tampa, and we need to be aware of that and reaching out to that, and that's part of what we're trying to do here at this time, and trying to do that.
Well, English and Spanish are the most popular languages in the world. Google tells us that there are over 450 million Spanish-speaking people in the world right now. Over 450 million. Now that's a humongous number. That's a big number of people out there. And what we're trying to do is we're not trying to divide nothing here, and you and I have talked about this. We're just trying to reach the people out there. That's what we're trying to do. If they understand Chinese, let's preach the gospel to them in Chinese. And this is the main topic here. When the gospel was preached for the first time, and I'm using that kind of loosely because I have to go on what is written about this, because I was born in 46, not in 39. But in 1939, I'm told, was when the Spanish work started in Mexico. And it was started by professors that were interested from Abilene Christian College. This was before the institutional problem broke out. So everybody was united. Everybody wanted to see the gospel being preached, no matter where. The Second War came, and churches in the U.S., all of a sudden they said, we got to go preach the gospel in Germany. We got to go to Italy. We got to go to London. We got to go to France. And they did. But then someone said, you know what? Why do we have to go so far? I mean, just go across the Rio Grande here. And I mean, we can do foreign work. And J.W. Treat and Howard Shug and Mac Kercheval, Wayne Partain, Bill Reeves, all of these guys, man, they took off. And they had us running all over the place. And that's how it started. Today, listen to this. There's over 350 Spanish-speaking congregations in Latin America.
It's fantastic.
Over 350. That's a big number. And that started, remember, in 1939.
I think it's your third slide here that maybe points out some of the spread of that. Maybe you can give us some background on that.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had forgotten about that.
Yeah,
Steve, thank you.
Slide 3, David. There we are.
Yes. Here you have the year. It was in the 1930s, where all of this talk. I read about this. I've been reading up on it. These professors at Abilene Christian College were men that, I mean, they were just real sincere in what they wanted to do. So what they did, they focused on the Rio Grande area of Texas, the lower part of South Texas. And they started to preach the gospel in Harlingen and McAllen and Brownsville and that area. And they started to convert people. And they converted a man who was a professor, a teacher down in Mexico. Pedro Rivas was the man's name. And so he took off. And from that year, 1939, they started to preach the gospel in Mexico. But let me emphasize that all of this started in the Valley of Texas, right there in the McAllen area. That's where this whole thing started. And then it went into Mexico. And every major city in Mexico, within 10 years, already had a congregation established. All of your major cities, Mexico City, Monterrey, Guadalajara, all of these places. And then all of a sudden you had 5 churches. All of a sudden you had 10 churches. And then, lo and behold, we hear the call from South America, from Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, all of these places. In Venezuela, when I started preaching back in 1965, a couple that was working with the petroleum industry in Venezuela came over to Port Arthur, Texas. And they said, Reuben, we want to talk to you about something. They said, we want you to go and live with us in Maracaibo, Venezuela. And I looked at him and I said, where in the world is Maracaibo, Venezuela? And he said, it's down in South America. He said, the petroleum industry is active out there. He said, there's a lot of people. There's no churches. There's no Christians in Maracaibo. We want you to go there. Well, I had just gotten married, and I was not in any position to make a move. But yet, like around, I would say 20 years later, I had the opportunity to go to Venezuela and help in the beginning of that work in Venezuela. And at that time, there was only one congregation, and today there are over 40 different congregations in Venezuela. Due to my work, to the work of Bill Reeves and Wayne and Jose Soto and Nino Esteves, who lives in Venezuela. So what you see here from South America to Costa Rica, in Central America, to the Caribbean and Cuba, Dominican Republic and Canada. Can you imagine Spanish-speaking churches in Canada? Can you imagine in England and Switzerland? You know, in Spain, of course, Spain's got to have a church at least, you know, that's the mother country. But this gives you an idea of what has happened, because it all started here in the USA, in South Texas.
That's a fantastic story. It's, I think, gives us a better perspective and appreciation for what happens beyond the United States during this time, that the gospel was being spread, even if we weren't aware of it. Tell us now about your trip to Peru that we had fellowship with you in.
Well, first of all, I want to again reiterate how grateful I am for your fellowship. I mean, this was great. And going to Peru has opened up just a new frontier. Bill Reeves and I made our first trip in 1997 to Lima, Peru. And at that time, there was a group of brethren that were meeting with an institutional church. And they were trying to do their best to help that particular church in Lima. Well, the preacher and the men that were there didn't want to have anything to do with that. So they had to move out. And they invited us to go over there and hold them gospel meetings, and we did. And we helped them to get organized. So Bill Reeves and I were instrumental in helping the work start in Lima. There was only one church back then. Now there's 5 different churches in Lima. And then this has gone out into the country. The northern part, Paita, for example, Piura, Catacaos, and this is where I was. You know, you may want to go to that slide.
Yeah.
Where you have the picture of the church in Catacaos. This congregation, when we first got there, numbered around 30 people, between 25 and 30 people. And then from there, they started growing. And they started because they pulled away from the institutional church in Piura, as you can see in the map. You have Lima down there, and then Piura way up on the top. And it's nearly 2.5-hour flight from to get to Piura. But Catacaos is a suburb of Piura. And here you have young people that are just hungry for the word, doing an excellent job. And the picture that follows, I hope you can show it now. You can tell there's a bunch of kids all over the place, and these are young couples, and this is just a part of the group. They number nearly 100 now. Can you imagine? In 2 years, a congregation that started with about between 25 and 30 have now reached 100 people, and they don't have elders. They have two men that are working with them, Brother Jesus and Brother Henry. Brother Henry is in the next picture there, but. This is a good idea, a good picture of people that are, you know, busy doing the Lord's work, and they're anxious. They are hungry for the work. And what I did with them, and this is something that I'm doing as often as I can. There is a need to teach people how to teach the gospel. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not an inventor, but what I want to be an imitator. I am persuaded that the best way to teach the gospel is to teach contextual studies. I am convinced that when we preach, when we teach, we need to respect the context. And here lately, in the last 12 years, I've been preparing studies. And whenever I go into Latin America, I emphasize this. I not only teach the need of teaching contextually, but I preach that way. And people do not get confused, going in their Bibles, jumping around from one passage to another. Now, I have to admit that that's the way we started preaching, and I have to admit that we're still doing it, and I have to admit that there is a need for it. But I am persuaded, my own personal opinion, is that contextual studies, and this is what I tell people. When you study the book of Philippians, for example, you study that book as though it were the only book in the Bible. Don't go to Revelation. Don't go to Genesis. Don't go to Matthew. Stay with Philippians. Concentrate on what it says. Look at what Paul writes to those brethren. Make the proper applications. And that way people will be familiar with a particular study that they're doing, whether it be an epistle or whether it be a topic. But that's what I'm doing with these brethren, and my last trip with them was very fruitful because we were able to accomplish all of this. And also we emphasized the order of the assemblies, praying correctly, singing correctly, teaching correctly. All of this is something that is very, very important. And talking about that, Robert Hartwriter approached me some years ago, and he said, "Reuben, can you help me translate some of my booklets?" So I did. His first two booklets on primary information, doctrinal issues, first rudiments. We did that, and these are available in Spanish. Bill Reeves and Wayne Partain have published commentaries on all of the books of the New Testament, and even commentaries on some of the books of the Old Testament. Then also Wayne and Bill have put together booklets of sermon outlines. At the very beginning of our work in Spanish, this was the poorest part of the work. We didn't have any commentaries in Spanish written by Christians. We didn't have literature available. We didn't have Bible class material. And now you go to Wayne Partain's website, you go to Bill Reeves' website, and you have a ton of information that you can use in Spanish. And people are downloading it, on the internet. And all of this is just part of this work that we're doing in Catacaos, for example, in Piura, and Paita, and Lima, and of course in Cuba. I just got back from Cuba, and we'll have more to say about that here in a few minutes. But the work in Catacaos, in Lima, is wide open, and I'm encouraging a lot of other brethren to start making these trips over there and helping these brethren out.
Who are some of the other men who are your companions in the work who travel with you?
Well, lately there's an outlaw from Miami, Ivan Palomino. Y'all are familiar with Ivan. I think he's been there with y'all several times. His daughter's a member there with y'all.
Nadia's father.
Ivan has been a tremendous help for me, and I really appreciate that because I don't like to go by myself. And this way, two preachers can stay out of trouble a lot. Of course, we like to eat a lot, but that's a different story. But I want you to know that I traveled with Bill Reeves, oh my goodness, for about some 20-something years, nearly 30 years. And I was his opening act. I would preach, and I would preach for 15, 20 minutes, and then I let Bill do the rest of the preaching. And I did a lot of that with him. And I've done a lot of work with my son, with Roland also. So we have worked together. Joe Soto was another man, but Joe passed away a year ago from COVID. Joe was just 1 month older than I, but he and I did a lot of traveling together. I don't know whether you ever met him, Steve, if you ever met Joe, but Joe was a tremendous gospel preacher, very knowledgeable. Joaquin Blanquio is another man that has done a lot of work with me. He is in McAllen, but he's 86 years old, and right now he's in a hospital. He's having heart trouble, but he's not able to travel anymore. So these are, Ivan here recently has been a tremendous help to me.
That's wonderful. Why don't you go ahead and talk about the work in Cuba, son? I know you've been there recently.
Cuba was a big challenge. Antonio Lira from Venezuela and I made our first trip in January of 1992. And again, you have to remember that Cuba had been left by itself for years. Very, very few of the churches, very few of the brethren knew anything about the institutional divide. So when we made our first trip back in 92, we visited with the preachers with a very small number of churches. There were like, if I'm not mistaken, about a dozen churches altogether. Fidel Castro had nearly destroyed all of the churches. They had lost their property, they had lost their furnishings, all of that. So I walk into an area that were just hungry for the gospel. I mean, we would have assemblies at night for 2 or 3 hours. They were not satisfied for 30 minutes or for an hour. They wanted to hear the gospel explained. And we did that. But we did this only with the churches that were registered. The government has a strong hold over any kind of movement within religion, because this is how the revolution started. So they don't want another revolution. But after my trip, working with the churches back then in 92 through 97, I knew that this was not going to last, because the institutional brethren decided that the only way to keep Amador out of Cuba was to increase the support, the financial support that they were giving to their own preachers. And I warned the preachers in Cuba back in that first trip. I told them, I said, you're going to be bought. They're going to buy you. And then what's going to happen is that you're going to tell me, don't come back, Reuben. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. But anyway, there were still some brethren that were interested in the gospel. They wanted to know the truth. They wanted New Testament Christianity. And I started working with them. But the opposition is very strong. There are Christians, there are sound churches in Cuba, but most of them have to keep a low profile because of the persecution among the sound brethren. The institutional brethren, they have the control of the ministry of religion in Cuba. So they control who owns property. They control what activities take place and all of that. So you have a difference between the brethren that want to be conservative, and you have over here the group that wants to be following the institutional movement. So right now, it's somewhat difficult for me to tell you how many churches there really are in Cuba. Some say that there are somewhere between 12 and 15 conservative churches, and I hear reports that really they're more like 6. Very few. And again, the struggle is there. But let me tell you, 2 gospel preachers from Tampa were the ones that got the work started in Cuba back in the 1930s. Brother Jimenez and Brother Esteves. They were Cubans, but they were the ones that were instrumental in the work, the Spanish work in Tampa, and then they moved to Havana, and they started the work in Havana. And again, this was back in the 1930s. I think I have a slide that yes, there it is. And here you have the names of the 2 preachers, Jose Ricardo Jimenez, a Cuban, and Ernesto Esteves, also a Cuban. And then after him came Brother Pedro Puig. Brother Puig was a Catholic priest, and he was converted, and he held a gospel meeting for us in Sinton way back when I was a kid. So that was the first Cuban that I met. He lived in Tampa, and he worked and preached there with his wife, and he died, a good number of years ago. But these were the three men that not only had something to do with the work in Cuba, but they had something to do with the work in Tampa. I have tried to find the church building where they were meeting. I understand that it's still standing. There is somewhere located in the Hispanic sector of Tampa. I used to have the address, but I don't have it anymore, Steve.
Okay. Well, it's interesting, that tie that is there. And I mentioned to someone who's lived here a long time, and I said to him, about 30% of the population in Tampa Bay is Hispanic, and he said, yeah, and most of those are Cuban. There is that tie there from the cigar industry coming up here and all those things that tied in with that. So there's a very strong tie from that standpoint. But the opportunity is certainly here for that, and we're excited about the future here, that what we're trying to do and what JP is trying to help us do. We're not trying to start a Spanish work. We're trying to convert those who speak Spanish to become a part of the Lord's body. That's what we're trying to do. And I think we have to have that kind of perspective about it as we talk about it. Reuben, just tell us briefly, what are your travel plans here in the future here?
Sure. Let me tell you something else before I forget.
Okay.
Nebraska Avenue, I don't know, is the church still meeting at Nebraska?
Yes.
They are? Well, Nebraska Avenue supported the work, the preachers in Cuba back in the 1930s. Can you imagine? That they go way back. They were having fellowship with Jimenez and Esteves and with Pedro Puig. So, that, and again, here lately, the last, 10, 15 years, I think, they were also, there was a group of Hispanic brethren that were meeting in their facilities. And, I'm having to base this on my memory. But I'm glad, that y'all are looking at the possibilities of working, more closely with the Hispanic people. Right now, in my plans, continue to work in Mexico. The first week of April, Ivan Palomino and I will be going down to Xonacatlan, Mexico. Xonacatlan is the Otomi name of the town, and it means the city of onions, of all things. And this is one of the churches that I helped start, back in about 1978, more or less. And it is the largest of the Spanish-speaking congregations in Mexico. They have an attendance of about 150, and it's all Spanish. And Ivan and I will be preaching for them. And I'm having plans to go back to Peru in July. I'm going to be in the Dominican Republic. In May, I will be preaching in Costa Rica and in the Dominican Republic in June. So these are the plans, the immediate plans that I have. I want to go back to Cuba, Lord willing, in August. And Argentina, Spain, the Canary Islands, and Ecuador. These are places where, like I mentioned earlier, not very many preachers are going to. So these are the plans that I have, as far as working with these congregations. But I'm real excited about the work in Catacaos, Peru. That congregation is a congregation that shows a lot of a big future there.
Well, Brother Reuben, I think we can all be thankful that you retired so that you can spend this time traveling the country preaching the gospel. We're certainly thankful for that. I want to give the audience here a chance to ask any questions they may have. Anybody got any questions for Reuben? Josh?
Does he have to take special measures to get into Cuba?
He's asking, Reuben, do you have to take any special measures to get into Cuba?
Yes, very, very, very much so. I'm not revealing revealing anything here. When I first started going into Cuba, I had no problems going in as an American. I was born and raised in the U.S., but because of the restrictions that our country has, I was able to get my Mexican passport because my dad was born in Mexico. So I have the privileges of having a dual citizenship. So I obtained a Mexican passport. And that's how I've been able to go in without any problems at all. I started going with a Mexican passport in 1996. I never had a problem until my last trip here the other day. And I was held up, and questioned and, interrogated. But then after 15, 20 minutes, they let me go without any further comment, But I have had no problem. I keep my nose clean. I go in and mind my own business. I obey their laws. I'm a Mexican citizen. I'm an American citizen. I obey the laws of wherever I go. I have no choice. And this has opened up, the door to go into some of these places without any hindrance, any objections. And I guess my blue eyes and my fair complexion, helps to a certain extent so far. Anyway, I don't know about tomorrow, but so far I have had no problems in going in. I tell people this: I'm not worried about going in. I'm worried about coming out. That's wherever I go, for that matter.
All right. Anyone else? Yes, JP.
Does he try to get the brethren to use any different translations like NBLA, or is it only the RVR 60?
Okay. JP's asking if you try to get the brethren to use any other translations, such as what did you say,
NBLA.
The NBLA translation or others?
Well, yes. The answer is yes. I let people buy and use whatever translation, that they feel more comfortable with. But I do tell them to be real careful. The Reina Valera, which is the one that we use. We also have the American, the New American Standard translated now into Spanish, and it's a good version. And we tell people just be careful, because not all translations are translations, and of course, you do the same thing in English. So these are very inexpensive. They cost about $5. This hardback Bible in Spanish through the American Bible Society. You can get them for, it used to be $5. I haven't checked here recently. But, we don't argue with people about the translation.
All right. Anyone else with a question?
What does he mean by institutional?
Okay. Let's talk about that, Michael. I'll explain that to you, that difference, I think, rather than we get into a long discussion about that, about talking about what we're talking about in institutional churches, he was asking. And I think we'll discuss that. Anyone else? I can. Oh, she's asking, is it difficult to get into Venezuela?
Right now it is. I don't recommend it at all. Right now it's very dangerous for American citizens to be in Venezuela. I don't recommend it.
Okay.
I've been told not to go, and by preachers that I have a lot of confidence in, and so if they tell me don't go, I mean, I trust them.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes. How he would do that? Yeah, he's asking about how you go into new areas down there to start congregations. How does that work for you?
That's a good question. In every case that we have started, there's always got to be a connection somewhere. It's either a relative of a member of the church, and they'll go with me. That's how we got these work started. For example, in Xonacatlan, these kin folks of the brethren in Mexico City were already attending the assembly. They would drive. Can you imagine driving one whole hour by bus from Xonacatlan to Mexico City? And they were doing this Sunday and Wednesdays. And then they said, we sure would like to get the work started over there in Xonacatlan. I said, well, that's fine. Let's go ahead and work at it. So with contacts, you move and you go back to where the people live. And before you know it, we were able to get a group together, start the assembly together. And then they in time, they grow to be congregations. And it's always been based on a contact. Someone has a contact there. We'll follow up on it. They obey the gospel and they start meeting right there in their homes. And you asked a question the other day when you and I were talking about this. How do we go about all of this? How is it possible that the churches can multiply so easily? Well, it's because of word of mouth, because of relatives, connection, that people have, and this has been true since the very beginning. This is the nature of the work in Spanish. People want to share the gospel with others. And I fear that this is what we're lacking today. Christ and the gospel should be the face, the image of every local congregation. And I'm afraid that we're putting too much emphasis on the preacher being the face of the church, or some kind of movement within the local congregation. We need to focus on Christ and the gospel. That's what we do in Spanish, and stay away from putting emphasis on the preacher and things like that. We need to get away from this idea of forgetting that we're trying to save souls. In other words, so this is my point. Our focus should be to save the souls of people, and I'm afraid that we're looking at too much at the secular part of it. We want to save the family. We want to save teenagers. We are more concerned about keeping teenagers in the church. It's going to happen if we focus on the salvation of souls. All the rest of it is going to fall into place.
Amen. Amen, brother.
But if we emphasize the salvation of the family, the salvation of the country, the salvation of teenagers, we're barking up the wrong tree. This is my feeling. I mean, this is what I've learned through the years. Let's focus on saving the soul. Regardless, that person understands Spanish, preach it in Spanish. You understand Chinese, preach it in Chinese. You understand in English, preach it in English. That's what New Testament Christianity is all about, Acts chapter 2.
Well, Brother Reuben, I think we've taken enough of your time. This has been wonderful, enlightening, and encouraging, and I really think our brethren here feel the same way about it. So we certainly want to stay in contact with you and with your work, And we'll be praying for its success. And I will mention to you that we can check up on you, because I think Yvonne's been online here listening to this too. So we'll make sure everything was true that you.
I'm glad somebody can. Appreciate that so much. But I am deeply appreciative of the opportunity to speak with you all about this, and hope that the Lord will continue to bless you all in all of the good plans that you have. And if I can be of any help, Steve, please call me. Please.
Thank you so much, Reuben. Thank you. We'll talk
You're
to you
welcome.
later.
Thank you, sir.
All right. You know, one of the things I think about as I listen to him, and Bob, you know this too, so many parallels between what's happened there and what's happened in Ethiopia, about the challenge of the work that was there and how it was being done by institutional brethren, and really how unscriptural they had set things up. Mother churches that ran everything about who preached where and how much they made, and this was headquarters, and handled it like that, much like he was talking about. And how much the brethren appreciated being able to become free from that kind of organization to work independently like they did in the New Testament. And that's when growth began again to take place in Ethiopia. So the biblical plan works anywhere. And that's what I think we learned from talking to him today. And I think it's been great for us to do that. Well, I hope this has been beneficial and encouraging to us all. This is a great number to come and do this. And any more we can do in informing you about this type of work. JP has great knowledge of it. After I got well into this, I thought, well, JP should be conducting this interview, not me. But I've really enjoyed spending more time and talking to Reuben and about that work. And I hope it encourages us to see the door that is open here in Tampa to preach the gospel and convert those who just happen to speak a different language, and bring them to the Lord to be a part of the body of Christ here in Tampa, Florida. So I'm grateful for that. Well,